Hi TYB, how are you going with the book of Jeremiah? Now, this is 52 chapters, so take your time. As I said, here at TYB, we've got 3 parts to this. So you've got 3 kind of push along moments where we'll encourage you in this book. But this is an incredible prophetic book. This is a voice of correction from a prophet into a time where kings were doing what they wanted, and they were doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. We're going to read this. The time that Jeremiah is prophesying into is actually in 2 Kings. I think it's 23 to 35, and it goes through this time. Let me read you what time it is. It's the word. This is Jeremiah 1:1. The words of Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah, one of the priests of Ananoth in the territory of Benjamin. The word of the Lord came to him in the 13th year of the reign of Josiah, son of Amon, king of Judah, and through the reign of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, down to the 5th month of the 11th year of Zedekiah, son of Josiah, king of Judah. Specific. When the people of Jerusalem went into exile, he specifically says this is the time they went into exile, because he was there. Now, what that means to us is there is a specific period that just Jeremiah is prophesying into. Google search, again, go on your internet and Google search timeline of prophets and have a look at the history of what is happening at that time. Here at TYB, we're going to go through little bits and pieces, but we don't have time to go through the full history. If you want more, then as we suggest, go to the Tyndale Old Testament commentary and read the history of what is happening, and you can go on the commentary online or have a look, but you can read it in Kings. Have a look at those kings in Kings, read what they're doing, and this message of Jeremiah that comes through. So who is Jeremiah? Jeremiah, it says in the beginning, is the son of Hilkiah. Now, Hilkiah was a priest and a prophet at that time. It says one of the priests at Ananoth. So he was a son of a priest, and he was young. They said he was about 20 years old. And Ananoth is about 2 to 3 miles from Jerusalem. So he is just living just out of Jerusalem when Israel and Judah were separated in Judah. And he is gets this word of the Lord, and it starts to burn in him. Now, we know from Jeremiah, as we're going to read this, when the word of the Lord burns in him, he can't not say it. Do you know that moment when you feel like you've got a word for somebody and it just burns in you and you're thinking about it all night and you're like, I just have to tell them, right or wrong, I just have to tell them. This is Jeremiah. He's got this fire in his bones for the word of the Lord, and he says it. Now, his family, in fact, oppose him while he's prophesying and say, read it in 11:21 to 23 and 12:6. They oppose him and say, Jeremiah, you're crazy. What are you doing? So he has to go against his priestly family and say, look, I'm right. I know that this is what God is saying. Sometimes in your life, you have to stand strong for what God is telling you to do, even against your family, because God will vindicate you. Imagine that moment when they're going in exile and they come up to him and say, mate, you were right. We're so sorry. He is commanded to write it down. So this is his written account. Scholars say that there was a scribe called Baruch, you can read it in 36:4, who actually wrote this. His career spans 40 years of prophesying. So this is 40 years of prophecies. This prophetic call in Josiah's reign, King Josiah, which we're going to go through in the snapshot, about the destruction of Jerusalem. Jeremiah watches the temple and Jerusalem get destroyed and them go into exile. And as I said, it would have been a I told you so moment. He's called the suffering prophet because when you read this, it's like reading Paul. He gets whipped, he gets put in stocks, he gets accused of treason, he gets sedition and charges against him, he gets plotted against, he gets imprisoned, thrown into a cistern, which is a big pot. He gets thrown into that, forgotten by the king, and then another king goes, oh, heck, I think we've got a prophet in a pot somewhere, and goes and gets him. He gets held under arrest in a courtyard of the... Read it. No wonder he's whinging. He's like, oh my gosh, what could I possibly do? This message keeps coming out of me, and I'm getting persecuted for it. He lets God know his complaints, which is really funny. If you flip over to Jeremiah 11, he lets God, 12, sorry, he says, you are always righteous, Lord. When I bring a case before you, yet I would speak with you about your justice. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Has anyone, that prayer, hello. Why do all the faithless live at ease? You've planted them and they have taken root. They grow, and he talks to God and says, this is very annoying. I'm prophesying. They're putting me in prison. At one point, one of the kings rips up his prophecy and throws it out. So the scribe just writes it out again and gives it back to him. This prophet is speaking to kings that reject him, and he keeps speaking. He actually stays in Palestine when they're in their exile. He stays in Palestine and stays there until scholars say that he lives in Egypt and he dies in Egypt. So what are you reading? Let me just finish this snapshot on what you're reading. The materials in this book are not in order, so it is a little annoying. I'm a logical person, so he jumps around. One minute they're out of exile, the next minute they're in. It's like, oh my gosh, what's happening? The Old Testament, Introduction to the Old Testament by Longman and Dillard, which is a book you can get, says the great way of reading this is notice the words, the word of the Lord that came. And it does these structures. So the word of the Lord that came to Jeremiah concerning the drought, and then it does the word of the Lord about the drought, and then concerning the royal house of Judah, and then it does that bracket, and then the prophets, and then the nations, the word of the Lord when it came to Babylon and the Babylonians. So he kind of puts his prophecies into sections and brackets. As I said, not in chronological order, but still in these sections. Lots of prophetic prose, lots of poetry, lots of imagery that you can highlight, lots of metaphors and words of action and visions and complaints from Jeremiah, confessions and lament. Again, it's a hard book to read because it's quite doom and gloom, but have breaks in Psalms and then just jump back in, or maybe have a break in read Kings about what's happening at this time and then jump back in. This is a great text. Get to know Jeremiah, get to know him. This is a word. We've got this incredible dive, I think it was last week we released it, of Pastor Natalie about the call of the prophet. And sometimes you've got to prophesy when you really don't want to. So get to know Jeremiah as you read this book. Next week, we're going to go through what's happening in the historical context.